The story begins with Norm, an aging crime boss, hosting a tense meeting with his son-in-law and other key lieutenants. He makes it clear his time at the top won't last forever, and the organization is drowning in unresolved debt. When the meeting ends, Norm and his enforcer, Bull, head to a slaughterhouse run by a man who owes the syndicate money. The situation quickly turns sour. The owner has failed to pay up and now refuses to sign over the property despite earlier agreements. His defiance pushes Bull past the breaking point. In a brutal display, Bull hacks off several of the man's fingers, forcing him to sign away his business. But on the ride back, Bull senses something is wrong. Gary, the man who originally loaned money to the slaughterhouse, was nowhere to be found. Bull's questions are met with silence. Later that night, he returns home, only to find Gary's car parked outside. What he discovers inside shatters him. Gary has been sleeping with Bull's wife, Gemma. Stunned and betrayed, Bull says nothing. Instead, Gemma flees into their son Aiden's room, leaving Bull alone with the bitter truth. For the sake of his son, and out of loyalty to Norm, Bull buries his rage, keeping the betrayal hidden. Days later, Norm calls him in for a private talk. He admits Bull is the only man he truly trusts, but the truth cuts deep. Since Gemma has chosen Gary, Bull is no longer part of the family or the organization. When Bull confronts Gemma and Gary, his fury is cold and controlled. He reveals he has known about their affair all along, and that only his loyalty to Norm kept him from tearing everything apart. Bull announces he's leaving, but he makes one demand: full custody of Aiden. Norm refuses, declaring Bull unfit to raise his own son. The rejection breaks him. The next day, Bull shows up unannounced to take Aiden, showing the boy the tenderness he never gave anyone else. Soon after, Marco and Mike, two of Bull's closest allies, arrive with a message. Norm wants one last outing with Bull and Aiden at a local amusement park. Bull resists at first, determined to cut all ties, but their reassurance convinces him. At the park, Bull finally gets a rare moment of peace. He laughs with Aiden, rides the attractions, and savors fleeting happiness, completely unaware of the storm that still lies ahead. Not long after, Norm approached Bull at the amusement park and asked Marco and Mike to take Aiden on another ride. Once the boy was out of sight, Norm's tone shifted. Without warning, he drew a gun and ordered Bull to walk with him to the parking lot, where Gary was already waiting. Seething with rage, Bull unleashed years of pent-up fury, spitting venom at Gary, calling him a coward and a disgrace. He turned his wrath on Gemma as well, condemning her as unfaithful and willing to betray any man without hesitation. The insults cut deep, and Norm snapped. In a fit of rage, he struck Bull with the weapon and barked the order to throw him in the trunk. They drove him to a desolate field, where an abandoned bus stood waiting. There, Gemma appeared, livid, screaming at Bull for daring to take Aiden. The argument escalated until Norm silenced them both with a chilling question. If you lost Aiden, what would you do? Bull's reply was ice cold. I'd kill every last one of you. The threat rattled Norm to his core. Deciding to end things once and for all, he ordered his men to soak the bus in gasoline. After knocking Bull unconscious with a vodka bottle, they left him inside and set it ablaze. From a distance, Aiden crawled out of Gemma's car just in time to see his father consumed by fire. Screaming for him, the boy was dragged back into the car by Gemma, who abandoned Bull to a fiery death. But Bull didn't die. 10 years later, he returned, scarred, hardened, and driven by nothing but vengeance. His campaign began mercilessly, stepping out of a pickup truck to execute one of Norm's former allies without hesitation. Soon after, the scene cuts to the home of Norm's eldest daughter. She switches on the lights, only to find her husband bound and trembling. To her shock, Bull emerges from the shadows, very much alive, demanding to know where Norm and Gemma are hiding. She swears they've been estranged for 5 years, but Bull remembers all too well. The bus that burned him was theirs. Without mercy, he kills them both, pushing his bloody vendetta forward. The next morning, Norm visits Gemma and Gary at their new home, breaking the grim news of her sister's murder. Outraged, Gemma blames Norm's enemies, but Norm dismisses the idea, insisting he has no enemies left, and chalks it up to a botched robbery. Meanwhile, Bull presses on. His next move targets Marco, one of Norm's old comrades. Confronting Marco's young son, Bull orders him to deliver a message. "Tell your father to meet me at the park." Shaken, the boy obeys. When Marco hears Bull's name, denial gives way to dread. Terrified, he calls Norm, admitting that Bull, who should be dead, has returned. Norm instructs Marco to meet Bull and confirm with his own eyes. Before leaving, Norm arms himself with a knife and warns his wife to seal the house tight. No one goes in or out until he returns. At the park, Marco finally comes face to face with Bull. Overwhelmed with guilt, he drops his head, begging forgiveness and blaming his betrayal on following Norm's orders. But remorse is worthless to Bull. The next morning, Marco's wife answers a call from his phone, only to hear Bull's voice on the other end. Horrified, she rushes to the park, finding her husband's lifeless body. With Marco gone, Norm and Gary pay a visit to Bull's mother. Desperate to locate him, Norm demands answers. Frail but resolute, she insists Bull disappeared 10 years ago and hasn't been seen since. Norm doesn't buy it. Before leaving, he makes his threat clear. If she's lying, her life will be next. Hours after Norm and Gary stormed out, Bull returned to his mother's house, only to find her brutally murdered. The loss crushed him, but it also steeled his resolve. His next target was Mike, another of Norm's old accomplices. Mike had just picked up his 2 children from school when he saw a familiar figure waiting in a parked car. It was Bull, alive, a ghost from the past. Everyone thought Mike, Norm, and the others had burned him to death 10 years ago. Bull stepped out and forced Mike into the car at knife point, warning him that refusal meant instant death. As they drove, a terrified Mike pleaded for forgiveness, begging Bull to spare his children. But Bull's voice was ice cold. He wanted one thing: Gemma's whereabouts. Mike insisted he hadn't seen her in years, suggesting Norm and Gary might know more. Losing patience, Bull gave him an ultimatum: arrange a meeting with Gary at the fairground, or he and his children wouldn't live to see another day. While Mike scrambled to comply, Bull shockingly took a ride on the merry-go-round with Mike's youngest child, his face calm, detached, almost eerily at peace amid the chaos. Eventually, Mike told Bull he had reached Gary. Bull kept his word, sparing Mike and his children, but his pursuit of Gary was relentless. When the two finally came face to face, Gary froze, convinced he was staring at a dead man. Bull forced him to sit and play a video game, using every round to press him for answers about Norm and Gemma. Gary lied, claiming he hadn't seen Gemma in 6 years. Bull saw right through him. He left Gary bloodied and broken, but still breathing. That night, Bull stumbled onto a drug trafficking operation inside a nightclub, a haunting reminder of Gemma's old addiction. He cornered a courier, threatening him until the man led him to a local dealer. Bull asked if Gemma was one of his clients. The dealer agreed to talk for a price. Bull nodded, asked for a drink, then suddenly snapped. He pulled a knife, severing the dealer's hand, and tortured him until he finally agreed to take Bull straight to Gemma. At last, Bull found her, sleeping soundly in her home. He woke her with a roar, and she dropped to her knees, sobbing, begging for forgiveness. But Bull was done with forgiveness. Coldly, he ordered her to call Norm. Moments later, Norm entered, weapon drawn. Bull was ready. In a brutal struggle, he overpowered the aging crime boss, pinning him down with a pillow pressed against his throat. Demanding Aiden's location, Bull screamed his son's name until Gemma finally broke, revealing that the boy, abandoned years ago, was living under a downtown bridge. There was no mercy left. That night, Bull killed Gemma. At dawn, he found Aiden beneath the bridge and carried him to a nearby church. Soon after, Deputy Cheryl, Bull's former mother-in-law, who had once divorced Norm, entered the church, shocked to see Aiden unconscious on the floor. And there stood Bull. For her, it was like seeing a ghost. She demanded answers, but Bull's reply was calm, almost resigned. He didn't come seeking forgiveness. He had only returned to save his son. As Cheryl looked into his hollow eyes, she realized the horrifying truth. Bull had already died in that fire a decade ago. What remained was something else, something darker, fueled only by vengeance and the will to protect Aiden. Before leaving, Bull placed his son in Cheryl's care, thanking her quietly. Then, with a cold, distant stare, he walked away, disappearing once more into the shadows. Betrayed, burned, and left for dead, Bull rose from the ashes to claim his vengeance. But was it justice, or just the wrath of a man with nothing left to lose? If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more unforgettable stories.